Hello everyone, I'm back. Hopefully I can get this squeezed in, 8th period. This is your lesson 7, still dealing with the sine and cosine graphs. If you look at your notes, you see we have these two equations right here. Now I introduced the b term, which goes in front of the x. We are going to discuss the c term and what that means. There's also a d term that we will see in a later lesson. So our c term, which consider the function f of x equals sine x plus 3. We've already graphed y equals sine x, and it should be on your note packet. When we have a c term, this positive 3, we have seen it with parabolas, we've seen it with absolute value. What it does is it shifts the graph up 3 because it changes the y-axis. And when we're talking about sine and cosine curves, we're talking about a midline, which I mentioned in class yesterday as well. So the midline for the original sine graph is the x-axis as well as the cosine x. So the plus 3 means we're going to move the midline up 1, 2, 3 units. So our midline is going to be the line y equals 3. That's the midline. So it's still a sine curve, so it still starts at what would be the new origin, okay? And then it goes up, comes back down to the midline, goes down to the lowest, and back up to the midline. So the graph looks something like that. And it does the same as you go to negative. Okay, to go to the negative 2 pi. Usually the graphs are going to be between 0 and 2 pi, usually. Okay, sometimes you might see it between negative pi and pi. But that is the graph of y equals sine x plus 3. The next one, we have an A and a C this time. So remember, the A is your amplitude. So we're not even using the calculator. We're just going to go and sketch it right on the grid. So the plus 1 means I move the midline up 1. So the midline is at y equals 1. The 2 is your amplitude. So that means the highest I go is 2. The lowest is 2 units down, which is actually a negative 1. This is actually a 3 because it goes up 2 units. So it's cosine, and remember, cosine starts at the highest point because it's positive, comes down to the midline, down to the lowest point, back through the midline, and back up to the highest point. So that is your cosine. And if you go in the other direction, there's your midline, your lowest point, midline, and highest point. This is very important that we're doing this on every grid part of it, okay, because that's what's going to come into play in one of the future lessons. Okay, so A sine xc, A cosine xc, so C is the midline, there it is right there. A is the amplitude, we already did that. Okay, so we'll go right into graphing these. So we're going to do the range, then state the ranges. Okay, so we're going to graph it and then state the ranges. If you put in your calculator, it's just going to be helpful so you see what it looks like. If you get confused which one starts at the origin and which one starts above or below the origin. Or does it go up or down because of the negative. So we'll do the sine first, the 4 sine x minus 2. And I'll try to change this color here. So with this minus 2 right here, that's my new midline. So the midline goes down 2, okay, from the x-axis. So that's y equals negative 2. My amplitude is 4. And it's a sine curve, so it's going to start right here. So it goes up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 can go down 4. So from here, it's my starting point. It's going to go up to the highest point, which is right here. Come back down to the midline, which is here. Down to the lowest point. And then back up to the midline. So it looks like this. Now, we don't really change anything with the pi over 2, the pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, because our period is 1. Because remember the period, I'm sorry, it's 2 pi. 2 pi over b, the b is 1, and the period is 2 pi, meaning that you have one complete curve between 0 and 2 pi. So if you want to continue it on to the negative 2 pi, it comes down to the lowest point, up to the midline, up to the highest point, back to the midline. And there's the rest of your curve between negative 2 pi and 2 pi. Now, if we want to look at the next one, which is negative 2 cosine plus 3, so our midline goes up, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to have to move myself. So 1, 2, 3, this is the midline at y equals 3. And the max is 2 above and 2 below, but it is negative. So you have to be very careful of that. Negative right there. So that means that instead of starting above it, it starts below it. It starts down here at the lowest point. And then it's going to go to the midline, highest point, back to the midline, back to the lowest point, because it has to be one complete curve, because b is 1, the period is 2 pi. And so if we fill in the up to or down to negative 2 pi, I go to the midline, I go to the highest, I go down to the lowest, and you see it overlaps, and back up to the midline. Okay. Oh, what did I miss there? I think I missed something. Hold on, let me look at that. Okay. Oh, yes, I did. I missed this point right here, and then down to here. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's a little error. So when I came down, I missed the midline, and I go down to the lowest point. And I'm trying to erase this. No. So let me erase this. All right, regardless. If you have questions on that, I'll talk about it more in class tomorrow. Okay? So this one here, I just forgot that. So those are your graphs. Okay? Now in exercise 4, we want to determine the range of each of the following trig functions and express your answer in interval notation. So the range would be the midline plus or minus the amplitude. So the range is 4 plus 7, 4 minus 7. So it's 11 and negative 3. And it says to express your answer in interval notation, negative 3, 11, both with brackets. Now, this negative 5 in part B, that just tells you where it starts. So when you look up at the top here, where was it? The absolute value of A is your amplitude. So we have 2 is our midline, plus 5, minus 5, 7, negative 3. So therefore it is negative 3, 7. The last one, 35, is the midline, plus 25, minus 25. So you get 60 and 10, 10 to 60. That is your range. Because remember, your range are your y values. Okay, and then the last one, we're good. We're going to be under 10 minutes, hopefully. Determine the values of A and C to show how you arrived at your answer. So my finding is that C is easier to find. Because if I have my highest value is 22, my lowest value is 6, my midline has to be right in the middle. So that means that I'm going to do 22 plus 6 divided by 2, because it has to be right in the middle. So I have 28 over 2, which is 14. So that means my C is 14. So this should be 14 right here. Now A is going to be the difference. Okay, so it's either here or here. So I can do 22 minus 14, which gives me 8, or I can do 14 minus 6, which also gives me 8. And the graph below, determine the value. So that's it, A and C. Okay, I don't have to put it back into a formula. If they wanted you to, you would say y equals, what was A? 8 sine x plus 14. And that would be the equation. But they just want A and C, so you're done. All right, so again, if there's any questions about this graph here, let me know. I can go over it again or just show you the completed graph. Otherwise, bring your questions and your fluencies, because we got a lot of fluencies to do, and we will see you in class. See you.